So the TI Talks is a series of panels and discussions that will be taking place throughout the Interpack week. One every day at 3 o'clock here at the Taghleef Industries stand. So do check out the rest of the program and you'll be very welcome to come along. I'm Tim Sykes, I'm Brand Director at Packaging Europe, and I'll be your host today and very excited to moderate the first of these panels. I would, if you haven't had a chance already, encourage you to take a look around the Taghleef stand. There's the redesign area just behind you that's showcasing a lot of the exciting collaboration projects and innovation that Taghleef has brought to circular packaging design. And I haven't done it yet because I wanted to remain hygienic, but later on I'm going to have a go on the bicycle in the corner, the dynamic cyclers section there, where I'm informed that for every kilometre you cycle, Taghleef is going to donate to the victims of the Turkish earthquakes. And generally the dynamic cycle is a showcase of the Taghleef circularity vision, so interesting to check out. Anyway, let's get on with today's panel. Just a few practical points. We would like to make this interactive, so if you have any questions, we will have time for those at the end. Please don't be shy, raise your hands. I've had a few pre-submitted questions as well, which I will definitely get to. And let's introduce our panelists. So today's topic is looking at flexible packaging and how it can answer to the demands of sustainability. And we've got a great panel here who can explore this from rather different perspectives around the value chain and different areas of importance, looking at regulatory, EPR, and the design factors. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Feliks Bezati. Feliks leads Mars's global circular packaging strategy, with a special focus on improving recyclability of flexible packaging. He has extensive experience in packaging design and recycling infrastructure, and has previously held various positions around sustainability at companies such as Renault, Target, and Danone. Sévrine Pereira Teixeira is Senior Public Affairs Manager at EUROPEN, the European Organization for Packaging and the Environment, and which represents the packaging value chain in Brussels. We have Dennis Bankman, who has extensive experience in R&D and circular economy strategy development across adhesives and coatings, previously at Henkel. And he's now working with CEFLEX, and particularly around recyclability testing and design for the circular economy guidelines. And last but not least, we have Mike Jefferson, who is today here as representative of EXPRA, the umbrella organization for EPR, but in fact also within his work as a consultant works for CEFLEX, so can also wear that very relevant hat in today's discussion. So I'd like to start by just giving all of you, because you've got very different vantage points on this circular economy topic, just to give us a chance to say what does this world look like from where you're standing. So Feliks, as a brand owner, I'd like to go to you first. Could you tell us, what do you think your job as a brand owner is to contribute to this flexible circular economy challenge? And then what are the things you can't do? What are the things where you're relying on other stakeholders to do their part?
Does it work? Yes. Hi. So, hi everyone. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here and talk about this important topic for the circularity of flexible packaging. As brand owners, we place our goods in the market, but we need packaging to place our goods in the market. And the main challenging with packaging as such, and more concretely with flexible packaging, is one, the generation of waste that, let's say in Europe, might be collected. In the worst case scenario, they will go to a landfill or being incinerated, but they are other parts of the world that those waste might be mismanaged and ending up in the environment. So there is something to do there about the waste. And on the other side, when we talk about flexible packaging, plastics are made out of oil, oil a limited resource. So it's all about the resource scarcity. So we have two main challenges, which is the waste and the resource. So as brand owners, we want to decouple our dependency from waste and resource. So we really look at the circular economy to be inspired by it. So we really look about our packaging to be designed in a way that it remains in the economy and obviously out of the nature. Now, how we can achieve this? Going circular, even for flexible packaging, there are three main criteria. The first one is about the design. So how we design a packaging that we give it the maximum of chances to be recycled and be circulating in the circular economy. The second one is about having an infrastructure in place that will take this packaging that now became a waste, collect it, sort it, and recycle it. And by the moment that we recycle it, it's where the third condition enters, is we have produced this recycled material, how now we get this recycled material and introduce it back to our packaging. So in a way, we have this circularity. As brand owners, we have a full control when it comes to the design. So we decide what type of packaging we put in the market, what combinations, what colors, what mix of plastic with paper, with aluminum or whatever. So we have this choice. We also decide how much recycled material we use. So the third piece. What we cannot control, and it is a shared responsibility, is the infrastructure piece. So it's this connection between the waste and the recycled material, and is about the collection, sorting, and the recycling. This today, we do not have a full control, but we have an influence, especially in Europe, with the EPR systems, and we will talk about it. But we are also dependent, I will say, on different stakeholders on how we can manage this. So there are things as brand owners that we can control, others that we definitely need collaboration to be successful.
Thanks, Feliks. And let's turn to Dennis next. So CEFLEX, I guess everyone in the audience knows CEFLEX, but just in case you don't, it's the platform which is trying to really orchestrate the value chain and all stakeholders and to create the blueprint for a circular economy in flexibles in across Europe. CEFLEX is working on this blueprint and trying to figure out the foundations of such a circular economy. Feliks has just talked about the requirement for infrastructure. Maybe you could expand on that and what kind of infrastructure do we need to develop that economy?
Certainly, thank you. So, first of all, pleasure to be here. And as you mentioned, CEFLEX is a value chain initiative where we bring together different steps of the value chain to find the solutions that can work and make a circular economy for flexible packaging happen. And indeed, as Felix said, so the infrastructure is a key requirement for the implementation. It is there for making what brand owners do in terms of design turn into a reality of recycling in practice and at scale. And if you will, infrastructure is a collection of technology. I mean, most of what we do in circularity is technology-based. So in CEFLEX, we look at, amongst other things, that interface between design and the technologies we have today, or the up-and-coming technologies, in collection, sorting, and recycling, to understand where is that overlap that can then be implemented and become infrastructure once it is available at scale. And that includes topics such as understanding how different designs or design choices on packaging interface with technology. How does it influence sorting? How does it influence recycling or the output of recycling, the quality? But also looking at the implementation level. For example, there was the project Quality Recycling Process, QRP, to understand how a more finer granulated sorting could give fractions of flexible packaging that could open up new applications for recycled materials to be used in flexibles. And I think important also to mention that something that isn't always considered under infrastructure, but I think that is key, and Marcel mentioned it, collection. A key point is, of course, materials need to be collected to ever have a chance and to be recycled, and they need to be collected for recycling. If they are collected in residuals, then of course they're headed another way.
Thank you. Feliks already mentioned EPR and the role that plays in orchestrating the circular economy. Mike, maybe you could talk us through what you see as the key requirements there.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite. So, I mean, I think one conclusion that I've drawn in the work that I'm involved in is the need, when we're looking at solving this problem of circularity, it's not possible for one player within the supply chain to solve it on their own. Feliks has talked about what he can control as a brand owner. Others will control different parts of the supply chain, but really what's needed is coordination amongst that supply chain. So I think historically EPR has been thought of as the correct mechanism to finance the circular economy, to write the checks that make things happen on the ground, to fund the infrastructure that's needed, etc., etc. But I think more and more people are starting to draw the conclusion, and I know it was conclusion in work that CEFLEX have done. Obviously, EXPRA believe this as well. But really, the role of EPR as a coordinator here, I think, is really, really important. Because if we're going to achieve these objectives, there needs to be someone or somebody or some mechanism to actually make sure that all of the actions at different points in the supply chain are joined up. So if we have a quick spin around the supply chain, we know the importance of design for recycling. It's fundamental to sorting, to getting the right recyclate quality, to be able to put it back into the packaging. Well, we have fee modulation for EPR. It's a legal requirement now for EPR schemes to have fee modulation to incentivize packaging design. If we look at collection, municipalities are legally responsible for collection, but clearly EPR schemes work very closely with municipalities to try and ask them to work with them to collect in certain ways, to collect the right items, etc., etc. Sorting. In many European countries, EPR schemes are involved in deciding the grades coming out of the sorting centres. In some countries, such as Belgium, they've been heavily involved in the design of the sorting centres and funding them. And that's vitally important as we move from a situation where flexible packaging, maybe if we go back 10 years, has historically been used in kind of mixed polyolefin applications, pallets, etc., etc., to one where we need more granular sorting, the polypropylene sorted from the PE, from the composites. Really, those drivers need to be put in place to make sure that what comes out of the sorting centres is suitable for the recyclers, so that the recyclers can turn it into recycled polymer, which is suitable for Feliks and other brand owners to turn back and to close that circle. So, yeah, I mean, I think that coordinating role for me, I think, is a really important one.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to turn to Sévrine. And, of course, another really important context is the regulatory landscape, and I think everyone knows that in Europe at the moment that's a very dynamic situation that we're looking at. Maybe you could give us some insights into how that looks at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that briefly because obviously there's a lot to be said. But yeah, there's a lot of movement at the moment at EU level in terms of legislation. So basically new EU legislation coming up soon. So essentially the European Commission published last year a big piece of regulation with new proposed requirements. It's basically aiming to revamp the current directive that is in place, but it's a big revamp. So many new elements coming up. What's quite relevant for companies is that first, without going into technicalities, the European Commission is proposing to have a regulation. What that means very concretely, the aim is essentially to have more harmonization of the measures on packaging across member states with direct applicability of the measures as soon as the text is adopted. We'll know when soon. And why I'm saying that is like for economic operators, so for all companies essentially, it's really important to know that because a year after the adoption of the text, essentially, many new requirements will kick in. And in that proposed text, a lot of the requirements are set directly on the companies, on the economic operators. Whilst at the moment, in the existing directive, for the majority of them, it's on the member states. So a lot of changes in there. The two big pillars are really recyclability and reuse. So basically requirements for economic operators, companies to make sure that their packaging are designed for recycling. If they are not designed for recycling after 2030, they will be off the market. So it really will define market access. And likewise, the Commission wants to ensure that the packaging is not only designed for recycling, but that it's effectively being recycled. So from 2035, as per the current proposal, we'll see if it changes in the process. All packaging will have to be recycled at scale. And that's where maybe I join Feliks in the sense that, and you as well, that we need to have that systemic approach to ensure that packaging gets recycled effectively. And then obviously, without going into too much details, there are other requirements related to incorporating plastic recycled content in packaging, a lot of other requirements on the design of packaging to ensure that its weight and volume is minimized, that we reduce empty space. There are quite a few proposed bans on packaging as well. Targets for reuse. I mean, the list goes on. Happy to answer any question afterwards, but it's obviously going to bring a lot of change, and probably very soon, because the decision makers in Brussels are at the moment working extremely fast on the text.
Thank you, Sévrine. So let's open up this to a conversation, and I'd like to pick up on the packaging and packaging waste regulation that Sévrine's been talking about, because that's obviously a big game changer in this whole endeavour. I'd be interested in the other three speakers' reflections on what that means for the mission that we're all part of. Is it helping you? Are you concerned? Feliks, maybe you can start.
Yes. I mean, imagine that you are today the major, I don't know, of Düsseldorf, okay? So when you collect the waste, you have basically three options. Not even three. I mean, landfill, it's not possible in German, but you have between incineration and recycling. Recycling today is the most expensive option for the mayor. Because, unfortunately, I would say, the cost of collecting, especially plastic, collecting it, sorting it, and the revenue that this plastic can bring, the difference there is higher on the collection and sorting. So, as such, we have a negative cost. And because the recycling is more expensive, and if we want to boost recycling, in a way, we need the framework that will help with it. I think that the regulation, to come to this point, the regulation is helping a lot. It's helping a lot in the sense that if we don't help the recycling, it's not going to happen, because it can, economically speaking, it's not the first choice. Now, are they things that in the regulation as such can be better written, etc.? Obviously, but they are basic things such as the design. We need to harmonize what it means recyclable. It cannot be different, I don't know, in Italy, in Germany, or in France. We need to harmonize the way of collection and sorting. It's not only important from an efficiency perspective, like how well a system can operate under several conditions when it comes to collection and sorting, but it's also important for the consumers. It's not possible that you go in a region that they are collecting this type of packaging and you go to another one they are not collecting. So the harmonization in this sense, it's important. It is important also the eco-modulation on the EPR fees. Packaging that can be more easily be recycled. It's normal that it's paying less EPR fees because it's costing less. Packaging that will need more money to be better recycled, it's normal that we should pay a little bit more. But the moment that we are asked to pay a little bit more, which is the case of flexible packaging, we are also expecting the system to collect this money and invest in it to develop the infrastructure behind. And the last one on the recycled content also goes in the right direction. As I was saying, to drive the circularity and to boost the circularity, we need to use more and more recycled material. So starting with the commitment there, it goes in the right direction.
Thank you. And I think we'll pick up on the recycled content in a moment. But first, just give Mike and Dennis a chance to build on Feliks's comments. Where do you see the likely and the desired impacts of the PPWR? Dennis.
Maybe I can have a go from the angle of design for recycling, because I think one thing that is at least with people I spoke to, quite universally appreciated is indeed that it's a regulation. So there's not going to be fragmentation across the member states in Europe. And I think particularly when it comes to design for recycling, I think, Feliks, you can chime in on that. A challenge that I see and hear from brand owners in particular is if you face, even within a geographical region, different requirements, which can be contradictory. So I think it's challenging enough to have a good design guidance. It's a complex matter to put the right things in there and to express it in a way that people who want to act on it do the right thing to support recycling. It is very technical. And if you want to do it 27 times, the chance of making something contradictory is pretty high. So I think this is the opportunity. But the devil is in the details. So if we have one regulation, the impact and the stakes are that much higher. So I think it needs to be good. And in particular, the details that we will fill in through the delegated acts on what does it mean to be recyclable if you're a flexible pack, if you're a PET bottle. I think this deserves a lot of attention, thorough work, and I think cannot be, fast-tracked to the point where we cut corners. I think this needs a robust development.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think it's possible for anyone to sit up here and say that the legislation isn't impactful and important. I mean, if we go back to 1994, when the first directive came in, it absolutely changed the way the packaging was recycled in Europe. That legislation is needed to drive the economics, to put the incentives there for investment, etc., etc. So, I mean, clearly, it's welcome the revision. I think it was time for a revision because we got so far as we probably could with the old legislation. This new legislation looks at a lot more granularity at some of the challenge areas which have become more apparent over the years, such as a need to get that design for recycling right, to make sure that as we start to move, I mean, originally the recycling target for plastic packaging was in the low 20s. If you start moving to 50% and 55% and above, then you need to make sure that those demand drivers are in place, the recycled content, etc., etc. So clearly very impactful. I think one of the challenges that the legislators and the Commission have had is just how complex it is and how much everything interacts. And I think we shouldn't forget how important it is when you set a target and the impact that can have when you set a target, the percentage that it's set at, how exactly it's set, who has the obligation. All of these are really important factors, which I think is why it's causing so much discussion in industry, amongst the legislators, the politicians. So, obviously very supportive of the direction of travel. Clearly, there are, I'm sure all associations have views as to what they would like to tweak, change, modify. And EXPRA, of course, is engaging in that process and feeding into the process. But the direction of travel and some of the key points that it's focusing on, I think, are important ones.
Thank you. Sévrine, you alluded to the provisions around recycled content. I'd like to explore what that means for the value chain, but perhaps first you could expand a little bit more. What do we know about the demands that are coming down in the pipeline?
Yes, so basically the European Commission is proposing to set recycled content targets, so a set for 2030. And one for 2040. So we have two horizons, basically, of targets. Basically, the requirement would fall on the plastic part of packaging. So I'll start there because from our perspective, this is actually quite a critical issue. So the text essentially tells you that you have to achieve that much percentage of recycled content in your unit of packaging on the plastic part of that unit of packaging. It's for contact-sensitive packaging made of PET, contact-sensitive packaging made of another polymer, beverage bottles in line with the Single-Use Plastics Directive. It basically takes the target from 2030 there and puts it in the new proposal, but also other types of packaging. I was mentioning the plastic part. For us, it's really quite a challenge and alarming because it means essentially that whatever the packaging type, whether it's fiber-based, a metal can, a glass bottle with an external coating in plastic, that would mean essentially, as per the text as it is written right now, that you would have to have in each unit of packaging a level of recycled content. I'll let the others maybe also explore the different challenges, but we know that it is at the moment extremely challenging to reach such targets, also because they're not so low. So we need essentially to have in this text, we very much support the direction of travel, but all the enabling conditions to allow companies to be able to reach those targets, basically. Maybe so.
Thank you. Yeah, Dennis, I'd like...
Maybe I can add to this.
Yeah,
and indeed, I mean, recycled content target in a PET polymer for a bottle is one thing. And in a polyolefin rigid, it's already a different one. And in a flexible, it's yet another one. And when we talk about food or contact-sensitive applications, in general, what's required is a pre-market approval by EFSA. We can already see the difference of how many hundred approvals we have for PET, how few we have for rigid olefins, and the absence of any for flexibles. But when we talk now about a coating on metal or on paper, this isn't the material you use as a film. It may not be an olefin, but even if it is, it's not the same olefin like a film. So here, beyond the contact question is even the question, what material stream does this recycled content come from if it's a coating on the inside of a can? So I think it's exactly this kind of technicality I wanted to allude to, that on the first higher level seems straightforward, but when you go into it and you try to implement it, it can resonate quite strongly in the market with, once such a requirement really becomes law.
And I'm interested in how this impacts the packaging development demands. So obviously packaging has very important quality and functional requirements. You've been working on the specifications for recyclability. What are the R&D implications?
I think the first implication is that there needs to be, or there will be, this is what the proposal says, there will be a European harmonized way of determining recyclability in the legal sense. And we've had guidance, such as CEFLEX providing design for a circular economy guidance. We've had other guidances, but there will be a legal definition of this, and there will be one, at least in the current model. So I think this means that this needs to be developed. It needs to be developed in a technically correct way, and it needs to be implementable. And I think this is putting a lot of drive behind that activity. There was a lot of talk about harmonization across Europe, but this is now given, let's say, a boost, I would say. And the other thing we need for this is data, because if we make design guides, we discriminate materials, and we should discriminate based on facts, on scientific data, to really separate the non-recyclable things from the things that are easily and well recyclable. And we should understand that this is really the case. And it's, as Sévrine just said, it's important to mind the details, because when you say plastic, for example, you mean something, but you may actually be talking about a much wider scope than what you meant. So I think spirit of regulation versus the practical legal text, I think will deserve a lot of attention.
And Feliks, as a food brand owner, there's a lot of regulation around food contact, isn't there? And I guess everyone's aware of the challenges involved in bringing recycled content and the impurities that come in that feed. Does this inform your views of the relative positions of chemical and mechanical recycling in the circular economy?
No, that's a great question as such. Where to start in a way? Without going too much into the details, they are basically three types of plastics that make more than 80% of plastic packaging today. I mean, both rigid and flexibles. Those three, one is PET, PE, polyethylene, and PP, polypropylene. So with those three ones, we make more than 80%. The only food grade, as it was mentioned, EFSA approved, is PET through mechanical recycling. And we know that it's much more challenging for polyethylene and polypropylene to come back to food grade applications through mechanical recycling. And it's based on science in a way, because the chemical structure of polyethylene and polypropylene, it's different than the chemical structure of PET, which is a polyester. But I will stop it there. But there is definitely a science behind why a plastic resin is performing better through mechanical recycling than others. In our case, because safety is first, obviously, and we do not want to take the risk, It will be challenging, at least I will say in the short term, till we don't find the right technology through mechanical recycling that will allow us recycle material being food grade. It will be challenging to get those volumes. So that's why we count a lot in the advanced chemical recycling to get this material back and in a way take our responsibility outside there. This is the only way for us to close the cycle and get the waste that we generated. So we really believe it is important, the chemical recycling, to be part of it. There are still discussions on clarifying what they call the mass balance, but again, without going into the details. But this piece in the legislation needs to come very soon so that the investments that they are behind can also happen in the short term. And maybe also just to mention, we have a case with Taghleef also. Like very recently, we launched our Kind product, like Kind chocolate bar, in collaboration with Taghleef with chemically recycled material like a few months back. And again, it was a value chain collaboration there, like going and picking flexibles, transforming this pyrolysis oil, identify the resin suppliers, and Taghleef making the conversion there.
And I'm interested in the regulatory and EPR perspectives, respectively, on this question of chemical versus, or the roles of chemical and mechanical recycling. To what extent, Sévrine, do you see the European regulation pushing the market towards those technologies?
Good question. So I think there is attention now and knowledge amongst decision makers that there's an urgent need for clarity on those new technologies, how we basically calculate what method we use. So already as part of the Single-Use Plastics Directive, the Commission is supposedly working already on calculation verification methodology, which we have not seen yet. And to an extent, from what we understand, it is supposed to account for chemical recycling and provide further clarity. I'm not sure that in the new regulation we will see any specific details on that. I don't think it precludes anything, but it's clear that from our perspective we need that clarity for, as you said, the companies being able to further invest. I mean, companies will have requirements in terms of recycled content, recyclability. I mean, all the types of packaging that are not recycled at scale from 2035 will be off market. So we also need essentially this part of the puzzle to be sorted.
Well, and from an EPR point of view, in terms of the practicalities of sorting and recycling, I mean, as I said earlier, the detail of the targets is so important because it, for example, in this case, links to the infrastructure. So if you have a contact-sensitive target at whatever, 10%, that's very different from what you would need if you have a target at 50% in terms of the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what's clear is that we need clarity as quickly as possible to understand what is required, I think. I think it's probably worth saying that there's a lot of delegated acts, secondary legislation foreseen within the PPWR because a lot of these issues are quite complex. So secondary legislation on the design criteria, secondary legislation on the how to calculate recycled content. And it's actually quite difficult to work out what's needed and what changes are needed without knowing the answers to some of these questions. And the interactivity I mentioned again earlier, I mean, in the PPWR, we have recycling rate targets, 50% by 2025 for plastic, 55% by 2030, and we have recycled content targets. Different technologies produce different levels of recycling in terms of what you put in and what comes out and what you can count as recycling. So there is an interaction between recycled content and recycling rates. There might need to be differences in the way that material are graded to produce a feedstock for the different technologies. And I think, you know, clearly these things take a lot of time to think through, but really if the investments are going to take place as soon as possible, it would be good to have some clarity there as well. But in terms of chemical recycling and mechanical recycling, I think from an EPR point of view, what will be very useful is for chemical recycling to start to look at some of the streams where mechanical recycling has found it more difficult to process the materials. So I'm thinking in particular here residues from mechanical recyclers, or it might be pulling polyolefins that have been lost in the sorting process out of a residual fraction. Perhaps it's difficult to sort them into PE, PP for mechanical recyclers, but you can mix them together into a mixed polyolefin for chemical recyclers. And there's a lot of work going on there. There's work going on now in Germany on secondary sorting centres, a lot of thinking going on in other countries such as France in terms of how material is graded and the role that that sort of technology can play.
And if I can add to this, I think for me the interesting point is that chemical recycling's role is also evolving, I think, in this, as you say, Mike. So while initially maybe at least some thought that chemical recycling can be an alternative to design for recycling and mechanical recycling, now it is a synergistic thought, as you say, of dealing with residues, dealing with more complicated structures. And I think it also takes on this new role even with well-designed packaging. There are, as Marcel said correctly, I think there are limitations to getting back into very sensitive applications such as food. So it takes on that other role. So I think increasingly we're going to be seeing design for recycling and chemical recycling, not an or. And at the same time, we'll also need design for chemical recycling, while not knowing necessarily when we design packaging which route the packaging will take. So I think what we'll see is an expansion of the scope of design for recycling also to consider all these additional opportunities from chemical recycling processes.
Thank you. And another of the issues that Sévrine raised was the requirement to have a certain proportion by enterprise of packaging recycled. I guess that not only means you need to get it recycled, but you need to be able to show that you've had it recycled. How, as a brand, Feliks, do you start to grapple with this reporting side?
I mean, so for the reporting as such is a challenge. Then I will come to the question on recycling. But if we touch on the topic of reporting, even us making reporting, like what type of packaging we use, etc., it's something that is in progress. And definitely it's something that we'll need to do, especially with EPR, the eco-modulation. So we'll need to report more into the details at better granularity, what type of packaging we place in the market, which is also an important information for what we call the downstream. Like the recyclers, they will need to know what they will receive, and they are not under surprise. If we have to report things on our side, I think it's also important that countries also, they report their performance when it comes to the recycling. A lot of them, they are black boxes. In the majority of the European countries, we only report the plastic recycling rate. And in some countries, God knows what's inside there. Might be plastic from household collection, might be industrial plastic. So there is definitely more transparency. And KPIs also, I will say at the country level, on how we can improve, because if we place an KPI in place, we can also ask for the governments to improve themselves on the efficiency. There is no reason why the recycling of plastics can work well in Germany or in Belgium, and it's not working in France. Really, there is no reason that the recycling of plastic in France, it is today around 30%, and in Belgium it's 50%. We talk about the same materials. So it's just the efficiency of the infrastructure in France that it's not at the level that it should be. And there are reasons, obviously, why. But this, I think, will help on even the countries competing and better performing.
Sorry, yeah, I maybe wanted to pick up on that. That's really a critical point in this proposed regulation, actually, from different perspectives. We were talking about collection earlier. You were mentioning Belgium, and the PRO Postplus in Belgium has done a lot of work, actually, to expand the infrastructure. And we see already, indeed, that the recycling rates increase quite rapidly. So it's as simple as that. Basically, you collect the packaging in the first place, and then the rest follows. But just to link on, situation being different in the different member states, already now, as industry, we get challenged a lot by the different member states in that process. It gets a bit technical, but essentially, member states now negotiating on the file are pushing a lot to keep as much flexibility as possible in terms of applying the future regulation. So challenging the legal instrument and basis of the text to essentially be able to keep their own system. And for us, it's really important that we keep this regulation as it is proposed by the European Commission at the moment, so that we can have harmonization, and that those countries that do not perform as well, as painful as the process might be, eventually will get there and we'll have, a better situation across the board.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on a couple of the points. I mean, I think just thinking about Belgium, you mentioned Belgium as an example of good practice, I guess, in terms of the work that's been done, which is indeed the case. I mean, Belgium, when they looked to include flexible packaging a few years ago, they did a lot of research and development. They redesigned the sorting centres, in fact, built 5 new sorting centres. They put strategic contracts in place with recyclers to incentivise investment, long-term supply contracts. In other countries, that's more difficult for PROs, and I think one of the challenges worth highlighting is the challenges around the national legislation in terms of facilitating some of these actions that are required. So in Belgium was one PRO for household packaging, FOS Plus, and so they could take these decisions. In many other countries, there are multiple PROs, and this seems to be the kind of direction of travel. There was 11 in Germany and 16 in Romania, etc., etc., etc. The legal structure in the countries, I think, needs to be in place to make sure that where you have multiple players in the market, the industry as a whole, the EPR system as a whole, can act to take the right moves to support changes to collection, changes to sorting that are needed, to fund communication to consumers, to be able to apply eco-modulation in a fair way and on a level playing field, so that if one PRO does the right thing in terms of spending money on communication or putting in place eco-modulation, that they're not disadvantaged compared to the others. And all of these things are possible, but the legislative environment needs to be in place to support the EPR systems in terms of doing what everyone knows needs to be done. And I think just finally, whilst I'm on this topic, I mean, I think it's probably worth highlighting, we spent a lot of time talking about the new legislation, but in the Waste Framework Directive from 2018, Article 8A, minimum requirements for EPR systems should have been in place across all European countries now, but they're not in many. So I think the new legislation is absolutely needed. It addresses some weaknesses in the old legislation that needed to be addressed, but we mustn't forget also about implementing what we have, because the PPWR is going to take a few years to come, and also I think dealing with some of these barriers at a national level that are kind of holding back some of the PROs that know what they need to do but can't, because they know that they're going to be disadvantaged against other participants in the market.
Thanks, Mike. I saw a signal from one of our friends from Taghleef Industries that indicated that our time has come to an end, but we still have time for some audience questions. So please, anyone who would like to put a question to any of our speakers, don't be shy, raise your hand. Also, while you're thinking about your questions, I just wanted to remind you that we have a networking session afterwards, so please feel free to stay behind and talk to our speakers and any of the Taghleef experts. I've seen a hand raised just over there in the audience.
Hi there, Rob Verhagen, OPA Group. I heard Feliks making an interesting statement that he believes very strongly in advanced mechanical recycling for food-grade applications. I was wondering if he could elaborate a bit on that and which techniques he thinks are interesting.
I said advanced chemical recycling, right? No, sorry.
I heard advanced mechanical recycling.
I was meaning advanced chemical recycling. If you had in mind dissolution precipitation might take a part there, let's start the other way around. Our belief is that we should not block technologies. We don't have the luxury to block technologies. We should open the door to as many technologies as possible, because we have a fight against plastic waste. The challenge today, it's not plastic as such, it's plastic waste. So we should not limit it ourselves to what technologies. We should open the door to technology so that we are able to go and capture as many waste outside there and bring them back to recycled material. So being it mechanical recycling, being it chemical recycling, being it dissolution precipitation, all those technologies are more than welcome because we need them.
Any other questions? So we did have some pre-submitted questions, so let me put these to the panel. So here's the first one. How do you see the link between PCR content availability regarding the proposed by PPWR and the target? Is it feasible? What is missing to make it achievable?
All of the above.
Yeah.
So I take that one first. I think
you, Mike. That's brave of you.
all of the above was actually probably the best answer that could be given. I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of the key issues today. I mean, the targets, the 2040 targets in particular, clearly, as they're currently written, 50% contact sensitive, 65% non-contact sensitive, aside from PET, which has a different target. Clearly, very, very challenging. If you look at the losses, for example, the challenges in terms of collection, the losses that are clear throughout the supply chain, maybe some of the calculation methodologies that will be used in some of the technologies that we'll need. So very, very stretching, very, very ambitious. Everything will need to align, I think, to get close to those targets and to meet those targets. And all of the above, I think. It's all of those parts of the supply chain working together, pulling in the same direction, and getting as much legal clarity and working through all of that important detail as quickly as possible to give people who need to invest in the sector that security, that knowledge to build their business case, to actually start building the infrastructure that we need to meet those targets.
And if I can just add, I think what you touch upon, Mike, is the mass flows, right? Is the material there? Is it collected? Is it sorted? Is it recycled? Do we have the technology? I think for the contact sensitive question is also a question of timeline, because every process that supplies into the sensitive applications, if it is mechanical or dissolution recycling, would need those approvals. So it's just as much a question of the procedure actually making the material available as the physical availability for those applications.
And maybe very quickly, beyond what was already mentioned, I was alluding earlier at that, from our perspective, those targets would already be easier to reach, if I can put it that way, and definitely we would entirely support them if they were rather placed on plastic packaging versus the plastic part of packaging that we were mentioning earlier, and also not having it set on each single unit of packaging, but rather work as an average of, what each company places on the market in terms of plastic packaging.
Maybe I'll add just the philosophical or theoretical part. Why we want to push for recycled content? The main reason is because we want to get more waste outside there. Definitely by using more recycled content, we decouple from oil. But the main reason to use more and more recycled content is to bring the waste outside there back in. And as such, I believe the most challenging thing will be to secure the feedstock, like getting the material, collecting, sorting, and have enough good quality to bring it back. But it's not a bad news. It's what we want. We want to get the waste outside there and bring it back. Get the waste that is ending up today in the landfills, in the incinerations, and bring it back in the economy. So the intent is good. It will definitely be a challenge, but it's a good news as a challenge.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Then I'll take another of our pre-submitted questions. This is something we didn't talk about actually in the panel, but also something that I think is touched upon in the PPWR, so interesting to bring it up. What's your opinion on bio-based resins? And also asking about the context of carbon emissions. So maybe we start with Sévrine and the renewable aspects that are spoken about in the PPWR.
Our organization represents all types of materials, actually. Maybe I should have mentioned that since the beginning. So, our line of thinking is that all packaging and all packaging types and all packaging materials are necessary. There's a lot of work being done by the companies, R&D, a lot of money, time, efforts, people, probably some of you, working on a day-to-day basis to find, the perfect fit for each application. So as a principle, first, we want to see that respected in legislation. Actually, in that one, on certain areas, we see that, legislators are mandating certain materials for certain applications, and for us, that's a step too far. So not to comment on renewables, I think, all options are equally good as long as, they're looked into in certain application environment, how to deal with them at the end of life. That's all the aspects that need to be looked at.
So how about from a producer's point of view, bio-based resins?
No, I can build, and maybe I will close the cycle on how I started in a way. So I was saying the two main challenges that we have for packaging is waste, downstream, and sourcing in a way with what material we make it upstream. So when we look at biomaterial, like bio-based or even composting as such, so bio-based material, it's mainly contributing on the upstream. So a plastic, I was saying, it's made of oil. So if it's made of bio-based material, we reduce our dependency on oil. Now, from a circular economy perspective, there is a hierarchy on priorities. Definitely, the first choice is recycled material. Why? Because recycled material, it's also contributing on decoupling the dependency on oil, but also, as I was saying, it's gathering waste. The bio-based material is only contributing on reducing dependency on oil, and obviously the last in the hierarchy is virgin. Now, if we were looking at compostable packaging, again, if we look on the waste hierarchy from a circular economy perspective, is the same thing. Priority 1 is reusable packaging because the cycle is very close. Priority 2 will be recycling, and priority 3 will be composting, because at the end, we just produce a compost, goes back to the environment, but we'll need to make the material again to start the cycle. So it is a solution, but it's quite low in the hierarchy, and it should really be looked at very specific applications.
Indeed, and I guess going around into back, you see certain applications where food contamination is impossible in the waste stream. The other part of this question was talking about the carbon dimension of bio-based feedstocks. I don't know if anyone would like to just comment on that.
Well, I'm a little bit going to jump into that last question as well, just to add additional point. I mean, decarbonisation of plastic clearly has got to be a good thing. I think it's important when we talk about bioplastics, and I assume here we're talking about bioplastics, not biodegradable bioplastics. I mean, obviously different. So I think how any target is implemented would be important. I think we need to maintain those demand drivers for the recycled content, because that was the key objective of putting in recycled content targets, for example. What any target that there might be in the future, what that number is, don't know, but what would be the ideal number? But clearly, all thinking should be driven by the environmental life cycle and benefits. From an EPR perspective specifically, I guess the only word of caution would be obviously to be putting bioplastics on the market which work with the existing infrastructure in terms of its capture, its sorting, and its recyclability, which can be done with bioplastics. But obviously not all types of bioplastics at the moment could fit in the supply chain. So if they don't fit in with the immediate supply chain, then great care, I think, needs to be taken to make sure that they're built in the right way, so it's not disruptive to current infrastructure.
Because you were asking for the footprint, I think there's a lot of questions around that are questions of how do you calculate it? Are you talking about the product's footprint? Are you talking about a corporate inventory, a country's inventory? I think there's a lot of questions on how you measure that. But if you allow me to take just the conceptual view and make my life a bit easier, I think when we think about circularity, as Marcel also said, so if we want to have a net zero carbon emissions economy, we have to be careful with virgin materials that end up in the atmosphere. Then we can take recycled materials, which was already in our daily lives in the technosphere, not in the atmosphere, and keep it there as much as we can. But it's not perfect, right? So this cycle is not 100%. We need to top it off with something. And I think this is where, and as Mike said, for example, drop-in replacements with biomass content in them, I think can be a good solution to top off the cycle and keep the economy running. There is, of course, the third option that maybe mentioned, carbon capture and utilization, but at least what I'm reading recently, it seems more and more to be the technology we need to keep on reserve to deal with sectors we cannot decarbonize. And that system's capabilities will not be endless. So I think this kind of topping it off to keep the tank full of materials we use for packaging, I think this is where I see bio-based materials as very valuable.
Thank you. And I've just received another signal from the crowd that it's time for us to wrap up this session. So I'd just like to, well, first of all, to thank our four wonderful speakers for sharing your insights and expertise. But maybe I could ask you to each finish with a very short closing thought. We've touched on how multidimensional and complex the circular economy challenge is, and how none of us can solve it, on our own. So maybe could you just give us some thoughts about how we can collaborate better to accelerate that process of constructing a circular economy in flexible plastics? And I've sprung this on you. I can see people thinking furiously. Sévrine is moving her microphone as though she's ready to go first.
I'll volunteer. We see it in our membership, right? Having different parts of the value chain being represented as such, I think it's already a great start. As you said, collaboration is key. Having such dialogues as well, and we'll continue to have them probably quite a lot in the coming months and years, is also key. I think from our perspective, representing the packaging industry, coming to such places, seeing all the work that's been done. Just walking down this hall, it's quite overwhelming to see, all the work that's being put out there, the different solutions that exist. I think putting it back into a regulatory perspective actually would be good. Maybe they're here to have a few legislators working down these halls, because we were talking earlier about, the specifics of packaging. We have a sense now, in legislative debates that it's being forgotten why we need packaging in the first place. So packaging sometimes is, portrayed as close to evil. So my message would probably be, for everyone to continue to do education also, to showcase why we need packaging essentially, and to continue to raise awareness towards the key people, basically building that legislation to understand basically how everything's working together.
Feliks.
On my side, I think all these years, what I have discovered in a way is that it's not a technological challenge. We know how we can do it. And it's mainly a question of the efficiency that is lacking. As I was saying before, there is no reason Belgium is performing better than France. And we need the regulations to help with framing, probably to find the economics that work. And I will say the willingness. It can be consumer willingness, political willingness, but it's a willingness to bring this change. But it's definitely not a technological challenge. We know how to do, and it's what Sévrine was saying. It's the example is here. Maybe 3 years there was not here, but all the changes of going on monomaterial, for example, for flexible is there. I saw a lot of proposal of packaging with recycled material is there. So the technological part of it is coming, and it's great, but we need also the systemic change in the infrastructure part.
Dennis.
To add another perspective, and I think I agree with you, Feliks, I think industry has come a very, very long way, whether it's what we see at this show or what we've seen also in Düsseldorf at K show, at actually the last 2 K shows. I think there's a lot of momentum and a lot of connections have been made. I think coming back to the regulation, since we're now going to codify and agree essentially on what packaging should look like to be considered recyclable and to still be able to be on the market, I think more than ever it's important that we work along the value chain, but not only along the main branch, but also to the sides, our equipment manufacturers, our additive suppliers, everybody who needs to be involved to make sure we find the best possible expression of what we think matches the technology we have, because we have solutions in hand, but I think we need to agree on it. We need to understand each other's language and express it in the best possible way so that we can really then finally get also to the full speed implementation of what we established.
Thank you. And Mike.
I think I'm going to come back to stress my point on how we facilitate coordination. I said at the beginning that I think EPR is very, very well placed to carry out that coordinating role. But when I go around Europe and I speak to different PROs and EPR schemes, perhaps in countries which have got lower levels of recycling, normally what I find is they know what to do. But they put in front of me a list of these are the barriers in terms of getting to where we know we need to get to. The technology we know what infrastructure is required, etc., etc. So I think EPR can play that role, but I think my main point would be that EPR needs to operate in a supportive legal structure, not just at a European level, but at a national level, to make sure that everyone's coordinated, but also pulling in the same direction and to create that level playing field.
Thank you. And thanks again to our four speakers, Feliks, Sévrine, Dennis, and Mike. So thank you everyone else for joining us today and engaging. And as I said, you're very welcome to stay now for networking and to engage with all of the fine experts we have on the stand today. Thank you.